The show is set hundreds of years before the film, in a time where Thra is thriving a bit more, but not all is what it seems in more than one way. We see that there is a blight slowly moving across a land that is infecting other creatures. This is called the Darkening, which is an aspect of lore I really love that they brought into the show. And it makes the importance of restoring the crystal even more important. Not just making the Skeksis and Mystics one, but preserving the world of Thra. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The main regard in which not all is what it seems is that at first it seems that the Skeksis and the Gelfling are living in harmony, but they're not. It's more akin to a slave-master relationship, if only the master knows that it's a slave-master relationship. The Gelfling do not know they're being exploited, and we have one character who is a Gelfling princess, Brea, and she's very inquisitive, and she begins asking questions, and when she notices the weird thing, she will not ignore him. And when she finds out, and like everyone else who finds out slowly, they're horrified. Then we have Rianne, who's a Crystal Castle guard, and Deet rounding out our main cast. Each of them in their own way find out about what's going on, and they're our protagonists who go on a journey. They each have their own hero's journey. Deet has to go try to find the Gelfling Queen, warn her about what's going on with the Blight. Brea has to try to convince everyone else about what's really going on with the Skeksis, as does Rianne, but he has the added benefit of actually seeing the initial essence drain. Those of you who've seen the film know what the essence drain is, but here it's a bit more primitive, even once the scientist has the chair finally built. There's no mirrors involved. And trying to convince everyone he's not crazy, that he actually saw what he saw, and that the Skeksis are not who they appear to be. They're all pulling the old Anatar ruse of like, oh, we your friends, when nope, they're anything but. And as the plot goes on, slowly the Gelfling begin to realize that the Skeksis aren't their friends, and it goes into what seems to be a climactic battle, but it's only the first battle in this new age of resistance, where it's going to be Gelfling versus Skeksis. And with that, we do see the beginning of things like the Gartham does expand on dream fasting, and we see a lot of that in this show instead of just the one in the original film, which is nice. We see you can use it to actually show what you saw, which was nice. That sometimes Gelfling will choose not to do it because if someone's mentally ill, it could spread, which makes sense for a ability of this caliber. It also shows that there is this realm that helps with it. Get a little bit more info on Aughra, her relationship with Thra, the crystal and the stars, and her relationship with the Skeksis. And it's kind of her fault that the Skeksis ended up doing what they do, but her whole motivation is to undo the damage caused by the Skeksis and repent. And I'd say she does a good job of it, especially when you take the events of the film into account, with providing Jin with the crystal shard. Which, that's one thing that was kind of disappointing me up until the end, is that the shard was only mentioned in passing when they mentioned that the crystal was cracked and like a shard is missing. It's like, oh well, are we ever going to see the shard? It does come into play by the end of the show, but it is not a major MacGuffin as of yet. It's part of the MacGuffin for the last arc of the show, but it's not the MacGuffin itself. I'm not going to give any spoilers for why I say that. The puppet work was amazing, and the puppets all look pretty good. They don't look as worn down as they did in the original film, where the character, or such as the Skeksis, are older, the Mystics are older, Jen is supposed to be, as a Gelfling, he was a little bit more rustic. Here, they're more at the height of their powers, and it's also 30 more years advanced technology for puppetry, so they're going to be a little bit more refined. There were a couple moments where maybe it's the lighting and the high definition kind of spoiled the illusion a tad, but it was in a charming way. It's like when you were watching King Kong and you noticed how the fur ruffles in a manner that might not on an actual ape, even with the whole muscle movement into account, but you go with it and it's a little bit of a charm. There is some CGI used in the show, but instead of using it for the puppets, it's used for the effects around the puppets, such as moving shots when they're in a vehicle, when they're transitioning from one place to another, map shots. But it's rendered in a manner that goes hand in hand with the puppetry and makes it almost look like it is puppetry. But I'll say this, if it is small puppets they're using, whatever they used in post to tweak it made it look more like CGI to my eyes. So just for those of you who might want to say if it is actual puppets, to my eyes it looked like CGI with a weird rendering. Not that it was a problem, it's just something I have to note. The voice acting was also pretty good, and unlike the original where it was mainly the puppeteers doing the voices and maybe some people that they hired for other characters, such as Aughra, here all the characters seem to be voiced by well-known people. I mean, we got Eddie Izzard in there as one of the Gelfling. You got Helena Bonham Carter as the old Maldra, who is the Gelfling queen. I didn't even notice that was her at first, but I'm like, this voice sounds familiar. Toby Jones as the librarian. Got Natalie Dorner in there as a Gelfling. Mark Strong as the father of Rianne. Got Jason Isaacs in there as the Emperor Skeksis, which it was nice to see his character expanded upon, because he's only in one scene in the original movie, and it's his death scene, and based on his puppet design, it's like, that definitely looks like a younger version of that guy who turned into dust in the first film. Simon Pegg is a Chamberlain, and of the ones who are voicing characters who were in the original, he comes the closest to sounding like his original voice. And at times I was actually fooled, like, did they get the original villain back? But then you can notice the subtleties in the voice. But you can also say, hey, the Chamberlain's younger, so maybe his voice isn't as decrepit. And that's also another thing that goes hand in hand with the other major voice actor they had in here, and that is Mark Hamill. Mark Hamill is in here voicing the scientist Skeksis, which, even without reading the credits, I could already tell that's who it was. While it's not his Joker voice per se, there are aspects of this voice that are in his Joker voice. It's essentially, if you were to take his Joker voice, take away the insanity and the most of the over-the-topness, and just keep the raspiness, the gravelly part of it, maybe a little shriek. That's what he has as a scientist. And when I heard that, I'm like, oh, that works. The only thing is, in the original, a scientist was more like, silence animals, like a little bit more of a high thing, but Hamill's getting up there in age, so I don't expect him to be able to do that, but it fit the scientist. Of course, you got Benedict Wong as the general. You got Andy Samberg as the Conqueror, who was a nice little addition, because it's a nice Skeksis, which, when I saw that, I'm like, well, I wasn't expecting that. And his little part of the plot was a nice little addition to the lore, which I'm not going to spoil, because it's an important part of the show, and I want my fellow Dark Crystal fans to experience this without it being spoiled. Another new Skeksis they introduced was the Hunter, which this was a scary, badass Skeksis. If they had a Skeksis like this in the original movie, parents would have probably complained even more because of how scary this guy was. And the way he was brought to life, I loved it. And I loved the skull design on him. You got Sigourney Weaver in there voicing a character called the Myth Speaker. We got Huppa Podling, who's a friend of Deet and wants to be a paladin, and all he has is a spoon, and he's like, he is a very, very loyal friend, and he is the best Podling character ever created. Another nice addition to the lore is that they actually show that the Gelflings actually had different tribes, and there are subtle genetic differences between them. Obviously, the ones that live underground have more big, dark eyes adjusted to darkness. The ones in the swamp, a little bit more green, dark skin. Other differences, sometimes it's just clothing aesthetic, like the Vapra. They have the more highfalutin, high society clothing that befit those who have the Almaldra. Whereas the ones lower down have more rustic, rag-like outfits, more in line with nature. And of course, we have ones that, even though they're supposed to be a seafaring folk, they kind of seem like they're Romani-based, but it kind of fits the fact that this tribe is, feared like the Romani are in real life. They're useful, but once their use is done, get out of here. We don't see too many of the mystics in the show. We only see Conqueror's counterpart and Hunter's counterpart, and they have some good plot-related moments. But other than that, they're all in hiding. Would have been nice to at least seen them in a scene where they're by themselves sensing what's going on, but for Season 2, we'll probably get to see a couple more of them. We'll probably also be able to see what the importance the crystal is going to have, because the prophecy does not come up at all in this show yet, which is probably going to come into play next season, because the Gartham are now in play, so got to come up with that prophecy somehow. And of course, that'll probably lead into an endgame where the Skeksis want the Gelfling annihilated, which, as an aside, one thing I'll have to say, just based on reading the Power of the Dark Crystal comic, I don't personally feel that the Skeksis annihilate all the Gelfling, maybe all the ones in the immediate area, but I think there are those who went underground to hide. That's part of the reason eventually we get the Firelings, if they don't exist already on Thra, because they're related to the Gelflings. Probably some more went up into the high mountains, probably more went across the sea, and then they only started to return once Jen and Kira were the masters of the crystal and they heard their call. Because I doubt, even if you take all of a Gelfling's potential childbearing years into account, that those two were able to repopulate it in the numbers we see in the comic. Just putting it out there for my fellow Dark Crystal fans. I'm not going to give all my thoughts on that comic. I'm going to do a review of it eventually. All in all, Age of Resistance is a fun little show. Definitely a worthy predecessor to the Dark Crystal movie. I mean, it definitely does have the television feel more than the theatrical feel when you compare it. But I expected that. I mean, other than those little minor things I mentioned about how the puppets kind of look in HD, there's not really many major complaints I have about it. Maybe I might notice some more as I rewatch the show, but just from the first watch, it has my stamp of approval. If you are a fan of the '82 film, definitely marathon this show.